Well, both of my parents were musicians of sorts. My father went to Juilliard, but at the time, most people don't know this, it was not the #1 school in music in New York. That was the Damrush School. It was a long time ago. My mother was a dilettante singer, and she performed on the radio under the name of Renee Roselle. Guess who was her favorite opera singer? Rosa Ponsell, exactly. And so there was always music in the house. My father, although he did not finish his degree in music, he became an accountant, a CPA. He loved music and he played the violin. And so we always had music in the house. And we would have musicales in the house where my mother would play the piano and my father would play the violin, or he would accompany her on the violin and she would sing. But we always had the FM radio on. Maybe it was AM at the time. Yes, it was only an AM radio, right. But there was one classical station, WQXR. And we always had classical music on. And I went to my very first concert when I was about 8. I went to Carnegie Hall with neighbors. And then I started going regularly to concerts when I was about 9. And I heard my very first opera when I was in high school, when a touring troupe came and did Rigoletto in about 45 minutes in English with unintelligible words. But I loved it because the music, Rigoletto, it's a tune fest. So that's kind of how I got started. And then I always did musical things. I taught myself how to play the guitar and I sang folk music. I learned how to get jobs. And then I went to college, and you had to say, like, what you were going to major in. So I said I was going to major in music, having no clue. And all of a sudden, I'm put in this program where, like, my entire day, every day, is just nothing but music classes and performing groups. And from there, it just... But I still didn't really know anything about opera. And I certainly didn't know anything about religious music. The two places that I really earned regular money from, not just like a little pocket change. I had 2 professional gigs. When we lived in the Dominican Republic, a troupe came through to sing, and they were going to do La Boheme. And through a friend, she convinced the opera director, Tony Stevenello, that on her say-so, I was capable of singing Musetta, which I was. And literally, without any rehearsal or anything, I stepped in one night and I sang Musetta in the National Theater in the Dominican Republic. When we lived in Boston, I auditioned for both the Boston Opera and the Boston Lyric Opera. And I did get one role through the Boston Lyric. I was Ortlinda in the Ring cycle, and it was done in Boston and New York. So those are my 3 big opera experiences. Other than that, I've done some duets and little things in concerts. But in terms of doing a whole role, those were it. Probably German, in order of languages. Well, of course, my best language to sing in is Spanish, because we lived in several South American countries where Spanish is the first language. And I do pretty well in Spanish. And that's a nice language to sing in. I don't think English is a good language to sing in, even though it's my native tongue. And then I would say German was my best language, and French was okay. My worst was Italian. I never studied Italian. So it was just phonetic Italian, which is absolutely dreadful, but it's what it was. And nobody complained. So I tried faking Italian when we were in Italy through Spanish, speaking Spanish with an Italian accent to try to get instructions how to go here or where's this. And they always understood me. The people who I asked always understood me completely, but I could never understand what they would say back, which is very typical when you sound like you know what you're doing when you don't. Well, that is a really good question. I have this discussion very often with my best friend, who is a conductor. And she thinks that, first of all, that criticism is almost meaningless. It's just people's opinions. And then we've discussed the fact that since I'm not paid, what is my opinion really worth? After all, anybody can have an opinion. People who know nothing, people who know a great deal. Why should my opinion count more than others? But I do think that there is a role, and that is, it's going to sound like a little vague or strange, but I think that there are certain standards that should be kept up in terms of excellence in singing and musicianship, and only people by speaking about them can point them out. For instance, if you hear somebody who has a beautiful voice but is terrible about phrasing, I think that's a legitimate issue to mention. But if you are one of these like listeners that just listen with sort of a blanket of sound, you have no idea that they're not phrasing. And so you need somebody to point it out. And then maybe then the person who's listening to the review or reading it can say, oh, I see what they mean. And then maybe they can become a little more educated. Because a lot of times we would go out with friends to operas, and they always would wait and say, well, Rowna, what did you think? What did you think? And I hate saying when I don't like the singer, because if they love the singer, why should I take away their enjoyment of the performance? So I try not to do that. But I don't, like one time we went to an opera with another couple, and the husband just thought the soprano was fabulous, and I thought she was just absolutely awful. And I just said, well, she's just not for me, just not for me. And he asked me, well, why not? And I said, well, she did have a pretty voice, and that's probably what you heard, but there's more to singing than just a pretty voice. And so I think that's why, just to mention a couple of names like Andrea Bocelli, why he's so popular. He has a pretty voice. You can't deny it. It's a pretty sound. But is he a legitimate opera singer? I don't think so, but hey, I'd be happy to sing as illegitimately as he does and make his kind of money. He obviously appeals to people. He does not project, right, because he didn't learn how to sing. He just has a nice voice, and Pavarotti found him, and he's appealing because the timbre in his voice that is just very heart-wrenching. Mm-hmm. I've even heard a record by Michael Bolton, the pop singer, singing Italian arias. I did not know who it was. And I said to my husband, that is the worst singing I have ever heard in my life. I'm going to have to ask the hostess if I can see what CD this is. And I saw it was Michael Bolton. And it was obvious. But for other people, they'll listen to Michael Bolton, and they don't know who it is, but they think it's great because the orchestra was great and he had all the right notes. But there was something wrong. Right. I try not to be too negative, especially with singers, because singers' instruments are uniquely affected by the singer's health, the environment, and what they ate, how they slept. A million things that would not affect a pianist or a conductor or a stage actor. And so I think you have to give them a larger berth of variability. Just like I sometimes say, like, let's just say you were living in a different age and you spent all your money to see Babe Ruth play at Yankee Stadium and he struck out 3 times. You'd say, what a bum, And now let's just say you pay hundreds or maybe even close to $1,000 for a ticket, or 2 of you go, 4 of you go to hear Jonas Kaufmann. He has an off night, which, by the way, he never has, because he'll cancel before that's going to happen. But another singer, they have an off night, and you think, oh my God, that was so terrible, or you're the reviewer. I just don't think it's fair. One of the things that's hard about music criticism of singers, it's really not fair to judge them on opening night. I think that singers should be reviewed after opening night. Opening night is like the final dress rehearsal. You can't have a dress rehearsal be like a performance. That's why very often people like to go to the last performance of a show. It was sort of like a freak show to me. What is she doing singing this? I mean, she didn't even know the tune, really. I mean, she barely knew the tune. And why would she sing that? What's the point? She has a great voice. I mean, people have to recognize another thing, that singers who are known, there are many singers, they have great voices, but they may not be great singers in the classical sense. Or she's one of them. Sarah Vaughan was a great singer. She had a good voice and was a great singer in her genre. When I started going to song recitals in the 60s, there was only one way to do it. The singers stood in the middle of the stage, the piano behind them, and they didn't move their hands. They also never had the music in front of them, ever. And today, many of these song cycles are staged. Also, many song recitals, not just of cycles, but the singer speaks in between. And I think it's a much better experience for the audience today to feel that the singer is connecting with you. I heard many of the world's greatest singers give recitals in Carnegie Hall, and also Hunter College used to have a fabulous series. So I heard from Crystal Ludwig, Shirley Verrett, Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau, names that are not known anymore today, it doesn't matter. But they were all great recitalists, and yet they didn't move. And yet you were moved by the music. The one actually that connected the most from all the singers was Crystal Ludwig, who was one of my all-time favorite singers. And what's interesting is today through YouTube and whatever, you can hear her recorded ad infinitum. Nothing compares to hearing her live. And there are many singers, it's a shame that whatever the magic that they had live was not translatable electronically, although you certainly would never say that she was anything but, one of the world's greatest singers. She was. But there was something special. And now another singer who was so great on stage that I don't think you noticed what her vocal flaws was Leonie Rizanek. I don't know whether you ever heard her. I mean, now when I listen to her, I go, I can't believe I thought she was so good. But she was. She convinced you she was a great singer. And so that's an art in itself, to convince people through something extra that they have. In speaking about all these great singers, of course, there are so many great singers from the past, but one that I did hear, I heard many that I didn't mention, but one that was really overlooked in the whole panoply of great singers is Eileen Farrell. What a singer. I mean, that woman had it all. Why she isn't like a more known than her contemporaries, I have no idea. Mm-hmm. I've heard stories about her husband, this and that, but she was the real deal in terms of what she had vocally and musically. She had both. Yes, without a doubt, I think we are in the age of one of the greatest singers of all time, and that's Jonas Kaufmann. Now, he's not everybody's cup of tea, and I could have a list this long of all the things that he doesn't do well. But what he does do well, he does at such a high level that I'm just in awe. I'm in awe of his consistency in performance, that he gives 100%. He's so committed to the music. His voice, to me, has such a unique timbre. He doesn't sound like a typical tenor singing the roles he sings. Another singer right on the tenor vein that I love is Joseph Kalea, because there's something about the timbre of his voice, that tight vibrato, that just appeals to me. And another singer that I love, that I don't know that I would have said this about him had I not met him personally, and that's Piotr Beczała. He's a great singer. He sings with all the greatest singers, Netrebko, all over the place. He has a very sweet voice. He fills up the Met. Met's a hard, 4,000 people. You've got to have a big voice. A very stylish singer. So from the men, there's that. For the women, right now, I would say we're very lucky to have Christine Goerke in the dramatic soprano area, because for the last many years I have not been privileged to hear a great dramatic soprano. In the 40s, 50s, and 60s, we had from Kirsten Flagstad and many other contemporaries whose names dropped way down because she was there, and then Birgit Nielsen singing so magnificently. The names that have taken those places just really do not compare. And I think that Christian Goerke, although she has not done a full ring in New York, she's done it elsewhere, is in that caliber. And so for that, I'm very excited. For a true spinto soprano, the kind that would sing Desdemona or sing in Don Carlo, Elisabetta, even Cho-Cho-san in Butterfly, I've been missing that kind of Renata Tebaldi sound. We don't really have that, but I think there's one on the way, and that's Sonia Yoncheva, who I heard in the live broadcast of Otello. Now, her voice is a little lighter, but she's only 33, so she has a little time to grow. However, at 33, Tebaldi already had that full bloom. You know, Leontine Price had that full, rich sound. And Yoncheva does not have that, but she has that beautiful and, enticing sound. Then in terms of baritones, right now I'm madly in love with Peter Mattei, because I just think his voice is beyond gorgeous. And I also have loved Bryn Terfel since he came around, although he's kind of at the end of his career, and I'm not so crazy about the way he sings now. In terms of bassos, it's just a category that never really appeals to me, although in the past there are some names that I've liked. But there's no true basso, not a bass baritone, but a true basso. I guess the great basso we have today would be Ferruccio Furlanetto. And of recent past, Samuel Ramey, who sang great. But he's still singing, and it's, not so great. But there's no basso right now that I think is of the caliber as was in the age of golden age singers, and we're still missing that kind of soprano. Another soprano I totally admire is Diana Damrau, who just has this sterling technique. And a name that I'm hoping will come around to full circle is her, I don't know how to pronounce her first name, is Priti Yende from South Africa. She's already sung at the Met twice, 2 roles. It's an enormous voice, enormous, and it's not fully under control. If she can put the final refining touches on her voice, I think there's a voice that will fulfill the great spinto roles. Other than that, you have some wonderful regional singers. They come here to Pittsburgh, other regional houses. They're fine, but they're not in the class. I hate to keep saying her name like Renata Tebaldi, but they're just not. Or Montserrat Caballé or Leontine Price. These were really, the backbone of the great Italian repertoire, where we need all these great singers. Now, coming into her own in this repertoire is Anna Netrebko. And I have to give that woman so much credit, because she started out as really an, in quotes, coloratura soprano without not enough great florid technique, in my opinion. I mean, other people would disagree and say she was great and everything. She had a really dark color to her low voice, which I thought was so fascinating. What I didn't know, of course nobody could know, is that's where her voice was going. It was going to the dark. And now her low notes, her low dark notes are so rich, and she's able to carry the richness all the way up. Now at the very top she thins it out, but doesn't get thin like a coloratura soprano does. Last year she did Lady Macbeth. I thought she pulled it off very well. And I heard her do, I thought she was a terrific Leonora. I'll tell you another singer I really admire today is Karita Matala, because she is so committed to the music that she sings, and she gives everything, and I think she is a sterling musician. I don't think it's a beautiful voice in terms of when you compare it to other singers who sing in the things that she sings, but she is just such a wonderful musician, and she sort of has been forgotten at the Met, you know, so that the younger rising, maybe more popular singers can get more chances. She did a Manon Lescaut several years ago that was fabulous, and now they have Christine Opalai singing. And she seems to be the reigning spinto today, and you just can't compare her with the spintos of yesterday. At least I can't. I admire her for what she does and what she has. She's got a lot, but it seems to be this area is sort of lacking in the operatic repertoire. I mean, we're loaded with baritones. Mm-hmm. Today is almost a golden age of baritones and great tenors too. We have a bunch of them. I didn't even mention Vittorio Grigolo, who is having a spectacular career, and on the way ups are Michael Fabiano, Brian Emil, Stephen Costello. They all have the potential of being really top name draws. We'll see. We'll see who winds up there. I don't think this guy Young-Hoon Lee is going to be there, but maybe, you know, there's no way to know where their voices will go. I think Anna Netrebko is just one of the smartest people around. You don't get to have a career like that without major brains. When you think about, there are probably lots of people with voices like hers, maybe not as good, maybe even better, who knows. But she's made a great career, and she's worked very hard. And she's not going to jeopardize that by saying things that are politically controversial. And it's hard because, as we all know, the music field is filled with gay people. It's filled with every kind of person, and yet Putin is so anti-gay. I mean, it's against the law to be gay in Russia. And so people would like Anna Netrebko and Valery Gergiev to stand up to this. It's not going to happen. It's just, you know, it's not realistic. And, you know, people ask me often, because they know I'm Jewish, only because I've sung so much in synagogues. Also, I'm very proud to be Jewish, although I'm not a religious person. I'm proud of my heritage, as I would be if I were whatever. But they always ask me, because I am a huge Wagner fan. How can a Jewish person love Wagner? And I mean, I'm astounded even by the question that people still think that. First of all, yes, he was anti-Semitic, and so were thousands of other people. But he didn't cause Nazism, and he didn't, you know, he didn't choose to have his own music be the venerated music by this madman. So, you know, equating him with, you know, the Holocaust is ridiculous, and yet many people do. Now, Daniel Barenboim has been a great champion of Wagner's music. He was the first person who conducted Wagner in Israel, which was extremely controversial and, you know, almost was led to almost riots from the news accounts we've heard. So there's, you know, politics and music. In fact, politics and music goes back a long way. You may or may not know this, but many people born of the Jewish faith had to convert in order for their music. Mendelssohn, exactly. And you know, there are other stories as well. And you know, it's interesting that Wagner's first, I mean, the person he really studied with was Meyerbeer, who was Jewish. And the person who premiered Parsifal, his most adored work, I mean, if any work could be identified with one composer, Parsifal, it's Wagner. And who conducted the premiere? A Jew. And who had control over that? Wagner. So, come on, he was a lunatic. He was a crazy person. And so, of course, he said all sorts of outrageous things, not just anti-Semitic things. He said anti-everything things. Okay, Renee Fleming. The first time I heard Renee Fleming, I thought I had died and gone to heaven. I thought it was a creamy, gorgeous sound. It's like liquid gold, just everything about her. And she had a CD called The Beautiful Voice, which I bought, and I loved everything she sang. Then over time, after listening to her sing more, I began to notice that she had certain vocal mannerisms, and then I became more and more aware of these mannerisms. And in fact, those mannerisms began to take over her singing to the point where she became like too quirky for me to enjoy because of things. For instance, this is real easy. Montserrat Caballé had an annoying habit of glottal stops, in the middle. And Renee Fleming has this other quality of scooping and like that, over dramatization, which I don't like. But hey, she's probably one of the most successful singers in the last 25 years. I've also heard her sing some things, even fairly recently, that were just of the highest level. She's a very smart woman. I heard her live not even 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, doing Recital, where she sings the very famous Song to the Moon, at the Met, which is a big theater. And she did a smart job, smart. But her singing didn't seduce me the way it did when she was young. She also has something else that she plays upon, which I think good for her, glamour. She makes people love her. Same thing with Netrebko. She's glamour personified. There are many singers, I don't want to mention any names, but they don't have it. And they don't play on it because they don't have it. From the past, we could say that about Montserrat Caballé. She was not a glamorous singer, but who wouldn't have paid money to hear her? And I heard her live. She was the real deal. Joan Sutherland didn't have glamour, but in the beginning, she was very much more attractive than she was later. She had a sort of elegance and nobility that she carried herself with. Very tall. I met her and her husband. I worked as a glorified gopher in her manager's office. And when she and her husband came one evening, I was asked to stay late to greet them and take care of them. And I hung up their coats, which did not clear the floor. That's what I remember. She had a mink coat, and it was so heavy. I didn't know how I was ever going to get it on the hanger. I never get that hanger on the rod. But she and her husband were very charming people. And no, she wasn't glamorous, and she's been criticized for many things. She's been criticized for her pronunciation, criticized for her non-acting style, and I would defend her to the ends of the earth on both. That she did not have lazy diction, and that she did do just fine on stage. No, she wasn't one of the great actresses like let's just say Nathalie Dessay, who throws herself into everything, or threw herself into everything. Nathalie Dessay, in an interview with Charlie Rose, mentioned that Joan Sutherland did not really act the roles, but she didn't. I can't imagine her saying that after seeing her sing Lucia. She was absolutely convincing as Lucia. Vocally, she just was. And even in Daughter of the Regiment, where she's supposed to play like a little ingenue, and she's already this 40-plus, maybe 50-plus woman weighing a lot of pounds, singing with Pavarotti, they were hysterical. They were just great. She knew how, I think she had an innate sense of theatricality that carried her through a lot of things. And she played a lot of glamorous roles and knew how to have herself dressed in such a way that was flattering to her large physique. Whereas other large singers don't, they do not look as good as she does. Child prodigies, child prodigies have like zero predictability. Beverly Sills was a child prodigy. She turned out pretty well. Deanna Durbin was a child prodigy. Whoever heard of her later? There are several others. I don't know what will happen to Jackie Evancho. Today, it's a business. You know, the parents are very wise. They know there's a lot of money in this. And I think the reason Jackie Evancho had as popular a career as she had, she was a very sweet girl with a beautiful sounding voice. But she had no idea what she was singing about. And yet, some of my friends who were musicians loved her, so go figure. It was sort of a manufactured sound, very manufactured. Romanian sopranos, to me, have had the famous Romanian sopranos have had almost like a nationalistic timbre. Eliana Cotrubas, Angela Gheorghiu, had that sound. Now, another great Romanian soprano, Virginia Ziani, did not. But those two, I mean, they could be sisters separated by 20 years in a certain quality. I'm not saying that they sound like each other, but there's something particular about that sound. Just like the Russian sound, all these Russian singers, they have a sound. There is no denying it. Same thing with the singers from Asia. They have a sound. You know what we're missing today? Italians. We don't have any Italian-sounding singers. I mean, when you think about it, who are the great Italian singers today? I mean, if you went around asking people, like, who's the greatest Italian tenor today? I don't know, who? Or baritone or basso. For sopranos, the name that would come up the most is Cecilia Bartoli, and yet she bills herself as a mezzo, and she is not a person who fills up the big opera houses. She's more of a chamber singer and recording artist and recitalist. Although I've seen her on YouTube in operas, she can do anything.